The morning in Minneapolis dawned cold and gray, typical of a harsh winter. Emily Thompson, with her 48 years dedicated to music and worship, prepared for another intense day at First Redemption Church. Her blue eyes, slightly marked by years of dedication, observed her reflection in the music room mirror. The church was a modern complex with bold architecture, glass walls revealing an internal structure filled with state-of-the-art sound equipment. Cables, microphones, monitors, and lights composed a true music production studio. For many, this space represented the pinnacle of contemporary worship. For Emily, it was her masterpiece. Her worship team was already in position. 5 professional musicians, all dressed in discreet and elegant clothes in shades of black and navy blue. Keyboards, guitars, electronic drums, and a backing vocal system that seemed more like a professional vocal ensemble. Every detail was meticulously calculated. "Good morning, team," Emily greeted, her firm voice echoing through the climate-controlled environment. "Today will be a special day. Let's prepare everything with excellence." Ryan, her lead guitarist, approached. Tall with slightly disheveled blonde hair, he represented the perfect stereotype of the contemporary Christian musician. "Pastor Sarah has confirmed the final details for this morning's service," he informed. "We'll have a live broadcast to more than 50 partner churches." Emily nodded, a discreet smile on her lips. The exposure, the numbers, the reach, all of this motivated her. She didn't yet realize that this same motivation would be her greatest spiritual challenge. The first worshippers began to arrive. A crowd of almost 2,000 members, mostly white, upper-middle class, elegantly dressed, smartphones in hand, some already recording the first moments of the service. The stage was a true cinematic production. LED lights created special effects, projecting images and textures on the walls. A giant screen served as a backdrop, displaying Bible verses with professional graphic design. When Emily took the stage, a thrill ran through the auditorium. Her movements were precise, her presence imposing. With a discreet headset microphone, she began to lead the moment of worship. The songs were a mix of contemporary pop with elements of worship. Lyrics that spoke of love, overcoming, victory, but rarely mentioned the cross, sacrifice, the true essence of faith. At that moment, Emily didn't imagine that her life was about to undergo a radical transformation. That routine of perfect performances would be completely dismantled by a supernatural experience that would change not only her life, but the lives of thousands of people. The ice storm outside was just a harbinger of the spiritual whirlwind that was to come. February 16th dawned under a blanket of ice that covered Minneapolis like a translucent and dangerous veil. The streets looked like horizontal mirrors, treacherous reflections of the relentless nature of the American winter. Emily had been called to an intercessory prayer meeting at the regional church, located almost 50 kilometers away. Her black Land Rover, the latest model, carefully glided along Interstate 494. The surrounding landscape was a monochromatic picture of white and gray, bare trees trembling under the cutting wind. Emily kept her eyes fixed on the road, hands firm on the steering wheel in absolute concentration. On the passenger seat lay her brown leather Bible and a tablet with her musical notes. A soft worship playlist played on the car's system, a mix of contemporary songs she had selected for the next service. "Lord," she murmured in prayer, "use me today. May my life be an instrument in your hands." Little did she know that this prayer would be answered in a way she could never have imagined. The truck appeared out of nowhere. A huge Freightliner cargo truck, completely out of control, skidding on the layer of ice. In the next instant, everything turned into a whirlwind of metal, shattered glass, and a deafening roar. The impact was brutal. Emily's Land Rover spun several times, flipping over on the side of the highway. Inside the vehicle, she remained motionless, unconscious, while around her the storm continued its relentless dance. Paramedics arrived quickly. Sirens cut through the white silence of the morning. Emergency technicians worked frantically to remove Emily from the destroyed vehicle. "No pulse," one of the rescuers shouted. "Start resuscitation maneuvers." 4 minutes and 23 seconds. That was the time Emily was clinically dead. But she wasn't really dead. She was on a journey that would change everything. At the exact moment her physical body lay inert, on the ambulance stretcher, Emily was experiencing a reality absolutely incomprehensible to the human mind. It wasn't pain, it wasn't fear. It was a peace that transcended any rational explanation. An intense light, but not blinding, completely enveloped her. It wasn't a common white light, but a composition of colors that moved like waves of pure energy. Each tone seemed to carry its own spiritual frequency, vibrating in celestial harmony. Gradually, Emily realized she could see her own body being revived by the paramedics. She observed the scene like a distant spectator, without any feeling of urgency or despair. Her consciousness hovered above the dramatic scene, in a dimension where time seemed not to exist. Suddenly, an unmistakable presence filled all that ethereal space. Jesus Christ was before her. It wasn't the traditional image from religious paintings. There was no white robe or stereotypical European appearance. It was a presence that translated love in its purest form, an energy that communicated more than words could express. Emily! The voice resonated simultaneously in her heart, her mind, and every cell of her spiritual existence. You need to understand what's happening with worship on earth. Visions began to manifest around them. Churches of all sizes and continents paraded like living holograms. Emily saw beyond what her physical eyes could capture. She could perceive the spiritual layers behind each congregation. In some churches, demons literally danced among the musicians, feeding on vanity and pride. In others, small groups of faithful prayed with tears and sincerity, and angels protected them. Worship has been corrupted, Jesus said, transformed into a human spectacle, far from true connection with me. The images were like invisible knives cutting through the veil of Emily's ignorance. She saw religious leaders more concerned with their performances than with the divine presence. Huge choirs, cinematic lighting, musicians dressed like pop artists. Everything seemed more like a show than a moment of spiritual communion. My daughter, the divine voice continued, music should be a channel, not the end goal. Many have transformed worship into idols of themselves. Spiritual tears ran down Emily's face, not of sadness, but of a deep understanding that went far beyond what any theology could explain. Jesus then showed her small, humble churches in poor communities, places where there was no technology, where instruments were simple, but the divine presence was intense. In these places, worship sprang genuine, without artifice. "You will be my instrument of restoration," said the voice, "to rescue the true purpose of worship." Hennepin County Medical Center was a maze of white corridors and machine sounds. Emily opened her eyes slowly, feeling every muscle in her body as if she had been through a war. The brightness was intense, almost blinding. Her first sight was of Ryan, the lead guitarist of her worship team, sitting beside her bed. His eyes, normally confident, were red from crying. "Emily!" he exclaimed, holding her hand. "Thank God you're alive." The doctors classified her case as a miracle. The accident had been catastrophic. The Land Rover was completely destroyed. Statistically, no one should have survived. But Emily not only survived, she was practically without any serious sequelae. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Ryan began to tell the details. The truck that hit her had lost control on the icy road. The driver suffered only minor injuries. Emily inexplicably was almost intact. But something had changed in her. Her eyes now carried a different depth. The supernatural experience she had lived was not a dream. It was more real than anything she had ever experienced in her life. The doctor, Dr. Thompson, entered the room, a middle-aged man, bald, with a scientific look that contrasted with Emily's spiritual experience. "Ms. Thompson," he said, consulting the reports, "it's literally a medical miracle. There's no scientific explanation for your current state. You should have multiple traumas, but you're practically intact." Emily knew that the explanation wasn't in the medical reports. It was in the mission she had received during those 4 minutes and 23 seconds of absence. Her first call would be to Pastor Sarah, the church leader. She needed to share what she had experienced. "Sarah," she said, as soon as the call was answered, "we need to talk. Everything we do in worship needs to change." The church leader found Emily's serious tone strange. Something had changed deeply in her friend and ministry partner. In the following days, Emily began to prepare her team for the transformation that was to come. She drastically reduced the technological elements of the services. She introduced prolonged moments of silence and prayer. She replaced commercial songs with deep, old hymns. The reaction wasn't long in coming. Some church members found the changes strange. Others began to feel something different, a presence that went beyond musical performance. Healings began to happen discreetly. People reported inner restorations during moments of worship. It was no longer a spectacle. It was a true encounter. Emily knew her journey was just beginning. The changes implemented by Emily didn't go unnoticed. First Redemption Church began to experience a transformation that divided opinions and generated internal tensions. Ryan, her closest musical collaborator, was the first to openly question the new guidelines. "Emily," he said in a worship team meeting, "we're losing our identity. People liked our style, our production." The worship leader remained calm. Her eyes, now with a different glow, seemed to see beyond what was being said. She knew that each word, each decision, carried a spiritual weight that went far beyond human understanding. "It's not about style, Ryan," she responded softly. "It's about true connection with God." Pastor Sarah, initially cautious, began to notice significant changes. The services, once filled with visual effects and pop music, now had prolonged moments of silence. Expensive instruments were replaced by simpler ones. The LED lights gave way to softer, more welcoming lighting. The numbers initially worried the leadership. Some families began to distance themselves, dissatisfied with the new format. Donations decreased. The church council pressed for explanations. It was then that the first reports of miracles began to emerge. Mary, a 68-year-old lady who suffered from severe arthritis, testified publicly during a service. "I never felt pain again," she declared through tears. "During the moment of worship, I felt something completely envelop me." Stories like this multiplied. A young drug addict found liberation. A couple on the brink of divorce experienced restoration. Each testimony was a blow to the traditional religious structure that the church had built. Ryan remained skeptical. Son of a traditional pastor, he had grown up seeing the church as a business, a place of performance and spiritual marketing. "This isn't sustainable," he argued in a private meeting with Emily. "We're going to lose our audience, our relevance." Emily smiled compassionately. "Relevance doesn't come from numbers or production. It comes from God's presence." Behind the scenes, spiritual forces waged a silent battle. Emily clearly perceived the invisible attacks. Temptations, doubts, divisions, everything seemed to conspire against the transformation that was being initiated. The traditional religious world began to observe what was happening at First Redemption Church. Some criticized, others were interested. Emily knew that her mission went far beyond that specific congregation. An unexpected invitation arrived. A national conference of worship leaders wanted her to share her experience and vision. It was the first step towards a change that could impact churches across the country. The Worship Leaders Conference was held at a convention center in Chicago, an imposing space that normally housed large corporate events. 500 church leaders from across the country were gathered, most wearing elegant attire that mixed corporate style with a ministerial touch. Emily was invited to speak on the second day of the event. When she took the stage, she noticed a mix of curiosity and skepticism in the eyes of those present. Her reputation as a worship leader from a modern church in Minneapolis was already known, but something had changed in her. Dressed simply, a discreet navy blue suit without any ostentation, Emily began her testimony. 4 minutes and 23 seconds, she began her speech, was the time I was clinically dead after a car accident. Absolute silence took over the auditorium. Even the most skeptical leaders couldn't look away. She shared every detail of her supernatural experience. The visions of Jesus, the revelation about corrupted worship, the churches where demons literally danced among the musicians. Each word was a blow to the traditional religious structure. "We've turned worship into a spectacle," she denounced. "We've created idols of ourselves, of our performance, of our music." Ryan, who accompanied her, felt uncomfortable. He knew That message could cost both of their careers in the religious environment dearly. Among those present, different reactions were forming. Some younger leaders seemed interested. Others, especially those from larger churches with grand musical productions, showed signs of irritation. Pastor John Roberts, leader of a megachurch in Dallas, stood up during the question time. "This sounds like an attack on churches that are reaching thousands," he challenged. "Our music, our production brings people into the church." Emily responded with a calmness that impressed everyone. "Bringing people into the temple is not the same as bringing them closer to God," she said. "We need worship that is a channel, not the end goal." During breaks, leaders from smaller churches sought her out. Pastors from simple communities in the country's interior wanted to hear more about her experience. Some shared similar accounts of profound spiritual moments. A journalist specializing in religion, Sarah Bennett, approached Emily. "Your story could revolutionize the religious landscape in the United States," she commented, "but it could also generate a lot of resistance." Emily knew this. Her mission was just beginning. In the weeks following the conference, Emily began a journey that would take her to different churches and communities. Her mission was simple, but profoundly challenging: to restore the essence of worship. The first stop was at a small Methodist church in rural Wisconsin, a simple wooden temple that contrasted completely with the modern megachurch from which she had emerged. The local pastor, James Thompson, a 62-year-old man with wrinkles that told stories of decades of ministry, welcomed her with a warm embrace. "We're ready to learn," he said, his eyes full of hope. The transformation wouldn't be easy. Emily knew that each congregation had its own dynamics, its own challenges. It wasn't about implementing a single model, but about awakening a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly worship. In her first workshop, she gathered musicians, worship leaders, and pastors. She began not with musical techniques, but with an exercise in spiritual introspection. "Close your eyes," she instructed. "Forget all instruments, all techniques. Imagine you're alone before God." The silence that followed was almost palpable. Some participants cried silently. Others felt an inexplicable weight. Ryan, who accompanied her on these trips, observed everything with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. His own spiritual journey was being completely redesigned. News of her mission began to spread. Journalist Sarah Bennett published a series of articles about the transformation Emily was provoking. Some called her a modern prophet, others a disturber of the established order. But the results spoke for themselves. Churches that followed her teachings reported profound transformations. It wasn't just about musical changes, but a spiritual revolution. A letter arrived from a community in Texas. A group of young people who had abandoned the traditional church began to meet again after implementing the principles shared by Emily. "We found something real," they wrote. "It's no longer about performance, it's about encounter." Sarah Bennett interviewed her again, this time for a national report. "What drives you?" the journalist asked. Emily answered simply, "The desire to see people encountering God, not a spectacle." Ryan, observing the interview, finally began to understand the depth of his leader's mission. It wasn't a criticism of churches, but a call for more authentic worship. The journey continued. Emily knew that each church, each community, would be a chapter in this transformation. The journey of transformation wouldn't be complete without personal challenges. Emily discovered this in the most unexpected way, when her own family began to question her new mission. Her younger sister, Elizabeth, a marketing executive in New York, called on a cold March afternoon. "What's happening to you, Emily?" she asked, her tone between concern and irritation. "You've left everything you built." The conversation revealed deeply rooted family tensions. Elizabeth had never fully understood Emily's ministerial calling. To her, her sister had wasted a potential successful career in the music industry for a religious obsession. "It's not about religion," Emily tried to explain. "It's about a true encounter with God." But the words seemed to find no echo. Elizabeth represented the thinking of many, the idea that faith was something peripheral, not central. Ryan observed this family dynamic with interest. He perceived how Emily's mission went far beyond musical transformations. It was an inner revolution that affected family, emotional, and spiritual structures. Days later, an unexpected invitation arrived. Rolling Stone magazine wanted to publish an extensive report on the worship revolution led by Emily. The same publication that normally covered rock bands was interested in her story. The interview would be a crucial test. Emily would need to explain her journey in a way that transcended traditional religious boundaries, reaching people beyond ecclesiastical circles. Sarah Bennett, the journalist who had been following her trajectory, would be responsible for the article. Together they would prepare a narrative that could touch hearts beyond the walls of churches. "I want people to understand," Emily said, during the preparation, "that this isn't about condemning but about restoring." The article promised to be a milestone in her mission of transformation. The Rolling Stone issue hit newsstands on a Thursday in May with a cover headline that intrigued millions: "The Woman Who Revolutionized Worship." Sarah Bennett's report spanned 10 pages, with photographs capturing Emily's transformative journey. Thousands of shares on social media followed. Churches from all corners of the country began discussing the article. Some religious leaders criticized it fiercely, while others saw it as a call for profound change. Pastor John Roberts, who had confronted Emily at the Chicago conference, wrote an article on a denominational Christian blog harshly attacking her message. An attempt to destabilize the current church model, he argued. But positive reactions outweighed the negative ones. Young people especially seemed to resonate with Emily's message. Worship groups began rethinking their strategies, seeking a more authentic connection. At First Redemption Church, the transformations continued. The number of members had decreased, but the quality of spiritual experiences had increased significantly. Reports of healings, restorations, and profound encounters with God replaced the old success metrics based on numbers. Ryan, completely transformed, became Emily's main collaborator in her mission. His personal journey of transformation was perhaps the greatest testimony to the changes that were happening. One afternoon, during a planning meeting, Emily received an unexpected call. It was a producer from a national television program interested in making a documentary about her story. "We want to show America what true worship means," said the producer. Emily knew this would be another crucial step in her mission. It was no longer just about a personal journey, but a movement that could transform entire communities. The National Conference of Worship Leaders had already scheduled her return, this time not as a guest, but as the main speaker. Emily was preparing not only to share her story, but to challenge an entire established religious structure. Ryan watched her, admiring how this woman who once led a grand musical performance now led a spiritual revolution based on simplicity and authenticity. "Are we ready?" he asked. Emily smiled. "We always have been." The National Conference of Religious Leaders would be the pinnacle of Emily's journey. Held at a convention center in Washington, D.C., it brought together over 1,000 church leaders from across the country. The auditorium was completely packed, a mixture of expectation and tension hanging in the air. Emily took the stage dressed simply, without the scenic apparatus that once characterized her musical performances. Her eyes, now deeper and serene, swept across the audience with an intensity that went beyond the visual. "I didn't come to condemn," she began her speech, "but to restore." At that moment, all the events of her life seemed to converge on that unique instant. The accident, the supernatural experience, the travels, the transformations, everything had prepared her for this moment. She shared details of her near-death experience that few had heard. The visions of Jesus, the demons dancing. In churches, the corruption of worship transformed into spectacle. Each word was a call, not an accusation. Ryan, seated in the front row, watched with tears in his eyes. His own transformation was the greatest testimony to that message. Journalist Sarah Bennett, documenting everything, knew that this moment would be historic. A silent revolution was happening right before her eyes. At the end of her speech, something unexpected happened. A profound silence took over the auditorium. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but one of deep reflection. Religious leaders who had arrived skeptical began to cry. Some knelt in prayer. The transformation wouldn't be immediate, but a seed had been planted. In the following months, Emily would initiate a series of retreats and workshops across the country, not to teach musical techniques, but to restore the essence of worship, a true and intimate encounter with the divine. Her sister Elizabeth, who had previously criticized her, finally began to understand the depth of her mission. A family reconciliation sealed this new stage. The national documentary about her story would reach millions, inspiring churches to rethink their models of worship. Ryan, now her main partner in this mission, summarized everything in one sentence during an interview. "It's not about music. It's about encounter." Emily knew her journey was just beginning. True worship wasn't a destination, but a continuous path of transformation and seeking.